Here's the short version to pull you in. After my son's friends left on a rainy Friday, pizza crusts, laughter, and muddy footprints trailing to the door, one of them stayed behind. He lingered in the kitchen with something careful in his eyes and a folded envelope in his pocket. What he shared about my son, about my late husband, and about a promise they'd made together changed the rhythm of my home in one quiet evening. Before we begin, tell me, what city are you watching from tonight? The house always sounded different after company. The air held echoes, as if the jokes were still bouncing off the walls, and the floor remembered where the heaviest steps had been. I was scraping plates into the trash when the front door clicked shut for the last time, and the living room settled into its old shape. Rain tapped a slow, patient beat against the window over the sink. I reached for a dish towel, swung around, and nearly bumped into him. Caleb stood in the doorway, hands stuffed into the pockets of his windbreaker, hair damp and flattened to one side. He'd grown at least an inch since I saw him last month, but he still had the same careful smile, like someone who's learned the difference between being quiet and being thoughtful. Behind him, our old porch light threw a warm square on the rug, gilding the edges of the pizza boxes stacked by the bin. "Everyone get home okay?" I asked, more to start them because I didn't know. I'd watched them tumble out into the night, calling goodbyes through their sleeves. "Yeah," he said. "Uber roulette went in our favor." He gave a small laugh that didn't quite take. "Do you have a minute?" The dish towel went over my shoulder, that automatic gesture my hands have done for years. "Of course. Sit. Unless you want tea first." "Tea sounds good," he said, but he didn't sit. He hovered by the table, tracing the grain with his thumb like it might give him courage. I set the kettle back on the burner, and it clicked awake. The dog materialized under the table. His policy is never to miss a conversation where crumbs might fall, and stationed himself between us like a small, wagging diplomat. The smell of rain came and went as the wind nosed at the door. "You can tell me anything," I said gently, because I could feel the weight in the room had shifted from leftovers to something with edges. "If it's about grades or rent or a dent in my car, we'll survive it." "It's not." He shook his head, then tried again. "It's not bad like that. It's important." I've been trying to figure out how to say it without making it sound bigger than it is, but it is big, and it's not mine to tell, except your son asked me to. And then he lost his nerve. He was speaking too quickly. I handed him a mug just to give his hands an assignment. He wrapped his fingers around it like a person climbing into a warm coat. "Take your time," I said. "We're not in a courtroom." He smiled, grateful, and let the steam fog his glasses for a second. "Okay. First, I want to say, your house is. It's the place I learned what quiet can feel like without feeling empty." He glanced at the photos on the wall, my husband holding our boy at the lake, my sister's kids at Christmas. I didn't have that growing up. I mean, I had a house. But not this. I felt something inside me turn toward him, the way a mother does even when it's not her child. "It's about your son," he went on, still careful. "But not because he did anything wrong. It's the opposite, actually. It's about how he's been carrying something and decided he didn't want to carry it alone anymore." He looked up, met my eyes, and didn't flinch. He asked me to stay tonight because he thought if I started the story, you'd hear it the way he meant it. The kettle began its low hum. I turned the flame down, not ready for the whistle to cut through the softness of his voice. "Last spring," Caleb said, "he started going to the Thursday night group over on Maple, the one at the community center. Grief and memory, they call it. He didn't want to tell you until he knew he could keep going. He was afraid if he said it out loud too soon, the feeling would break. I went with him the first week because he was nervous, and then I kept going because I needed it too. I sat before my knees suggested it. The chair was cool through the cotton of my dress. The dog settled with a sigh that sounded like permission. He told me he wanted to invite you, Caleb said. He's been thinking about it for months, but he didn't know how to ask without making you feel like you'd failed him by not seeing it. His smile was small but certain. You didn't fail him. He learned from you how to look for help that is real. I pressed my palm to the table to keep from reaching for him. Thank you for telling me that, I said. Thank you for going with him. Caleb nodded. There's more. A few of us in the group have been working on something. Your husband used to volunteer at the center, fixed the broken cabinet doors, built the book cart. They told us stories. He swallowed. We pooled money and time, and we ordered a small plaque for the bench by the maple tree. Nothing fancy. Just his name and the words he said to the director once. She wrote them down. The room tilted, not dangerously, but like a boat finding a new current. My husband always did have phrases that stuck like burrs in your sweater long after a walk. I could hear him saying something practical and kind, like he had hammered goodness into the wood of every sentence. Caleb reached into the inside pocket of his windbreaker and pulled out an envelope, soft at the corners. He slid it across the table with 2 fingers. I didn't pick it up. Not because I was afraid, but because sometimes reverence looks like restraint. Your son wanted to tell you tonight, Caleb said. He wanted to ask you to come with him next Thursday. They're going to put the plaque on the bench at sunset. He tried to find the words and he froze. Asked me to stay behind and start where he couldn't. Outside, a gust of rain flung itself at the window, and then was done. The way feelings hit when they've been waiting at the door too long. I picked up the envelope. The flap had been slit already, neatly, as if someone had checked and checked again that the letters were spelled right. Inside was a small card with a proof of the engraving. I turned it over and read, in honor of M's husband, who fixed what he could and stood with what he couldn't. My hand went to my mouth without permission. Tears didn't rush. They rose slow, like something thawing. For a flicker, I saw my husband at that bench with a tool belt slung low, explaining how wood wants to be listened to, not forced. Caleb's voice gentled. He thought it might be too much all at once, but he also thought you'd want to know before the night itself, so you could decide how to meet it. That's what he said. My mom will want to meet it on purpose. I laughed then, a brief, cracked thing. He knows me. He does, Caleb said. And he wanted me to tell you one more part. The group picked a theme for that night. What we carry. He was going to bring your husband's old tape measure. He gestured toward the garage with his chin, the yellow one with the crack in the clip. He says it still returns to its case crooked, no matter how gently you guide it. He likes that about it. Says grief behaves the same, doesn't roll back neatly, but it does return. I let that settle in the space between us. The dog laid his head on my foot. The kettle, forgotten, clicked itself off, deciding we didn't need a whistle after all. What do you need from me? I asked, when I trusted my voice. Caleb didn't hesitate. Just show up. That's all he wants. That's all any of us want, I think. He glanced down, then up again. And there's something I need, too. Not from you, exactly. From a mother, if you'll let me ask. I nodded, the kind that says yes even before the question has a shape. My mom lives 3 hours away, he said. We talk, but it's mostly about bills and weather. I'm not good at telling her when I'm scared. I want to try. After Thursday, he swallowed. Could you? I don't know. Tell me what words helped you when your son was learning how to speak the unspeakable. Not tonight. Sometime. The tenderness of the request undid me more than the plaque, because it was a boy asking the world how to become the man he needed, because it was someone who had chosen to stay behind and carry a message that might have been too heavy for one pair of hands. We'll make a list, I said, not of perfect sentences, of true ones. He smiled with relief so visible it brightened the room. He stood, tucked the empty envelope back into his jacket like a promise kept, and finally let the tea have its purpose. We drank in a quiet that wasn't empty. The rain slowed to a hush. When my son came in from the garage, hair mussed, smelling like damp wood and honesty, he stopped short at the sight of us. His eyes darted to the envelope, to my face, to Caleb's, and in that small triangle I saw boyhood and bravery shake hands. "I'm sorry," he started, words tripping. "I should have." I stood and crossed the space between us. "You asked for help," I said. "That's the bravest sentence in our family." He swallowed, shoulders loosening. Caleb slipped his hands back into his pockets, suddenly fascinated by the pattern in the floor. There would be more to say. There would be the bench and the sunset, and the tape measure laid across knees, stories told with unsteady voices and laughter that startled us by how easily it came. But for now, the night wrapped itself around the house, and the three of us stood in a circle that felt like a new room added to an old home, framed in listening, roofed in gentleness. And then Caleb cleared his throat. "There's one more thing," he said, a look passing between him and my son that I hadn't learned to read yet. He slid his hand back into the inside pocket of his jacket. "He wanted me to give you this if you said yes to Thursday." His fingers closed around something I couldn't see, small and weighty enough to tug at the fabric, waiting for my answer. The house felt softer the next morning, as if the walls had absorbed the words Caleb left behind. I woke earlier than usual, drawn to the kitchen like something was waiting there. The shoebox of pizza crumbs was gone, the counters clean, but the envelope with the plaque proof still sat where I had left it. Sunlight fell across the table in a thin stripe, and for a long while I just stared at those engraved words. He fixed what he could, and stood with what he couldn't. That was him perfectly. My son shuffled in with bed-creased hair, rubbing his eyes, clearly surprised to find me up before him. He glanced at the table, then at me. "So, Caleb told you." His voice carried both guilt and relief. "He did," I said gently. "And I'm glad he stayed behind. Sometimes it takes someone else to carry words the first few feet." He sat down, folding his hands on the table like he was bracing for a lecture. I reached over and touched his wrist instead. "You don't have to be afraid of telling me you're hurting, or that you need help. That doesn't make you weaker. It makes you wiser." He nodded, but I saw how his jaw worked, like he was holding back more. I let the silence stretch until he filled it. "I wanted to tell you months ago. Every Thursday I thought about it. But I pictured your face, how you looked when Dad's things came up, and I froze. I didn't want you to think I was stuck in grief. I just needed a place to put it down for a while." His honesty cracked something in me. I reached across, squeezed his hand. Grief isn't a place you get stuck. It's a place you learn how to carry. And sometimes carrying together is easier than carrying alone. We sat like that, the morning quiet wrapping around us. Then he leaned back, took a breath, and surprised me with a question. "Do you remember the bench by the maple tree at the center?" "Of course," I said. I could see it in my mind, paint chipped at the edges, leaves scattering across it in the fall. He gave a small, hopeful smile. "That's where the plaque's going. Next Thursday." I wanted you to be the first one to see it. Dad sat there once, told the director something simple, and they remembered it for years. When I heard the words, I realized it's how I want to live too. Fix what I can, stand with what I can't. The truth of it made my throat tighten. I pictured my husband's broad hands tightening bolts on the library cart, his easy way of shrugging at problems bigger than him. And now here was my son, choosing the same compass. Later that day, I called Caleb, invited him for dinner. When he arrived, he looked almost startled, as if he wasn't sure if he'd crossed a line by speaking the night before. I made it simple for him. You did right by both of us, I said. Sometimes carrying a secret too long makes it heavier than it needs to be. His shoulders eased. Over the meal, we laughed more than I expected. The boys teased each other, the dog begged under the table, and for a while the house sounded full again. But under it all, I felt a shift, like we had opened a window we'd kept shut for too many seasons. When Caleb left, my son lingered by the door. You'll come next Thursday, won't you? I touched his shoulder, feeling the solid weight of the man he had become. Of course I will. We'll stand there together. He nodded, eyes bright, and whispered, That's all I wanted. That night, as I folded laundry, I realized something. Grief had lived in our house for years like a shadow. But with one boy's courage to stay behind and speak, light had found its way back in. And though I knew more truths were still waiting, things my son hadn't yet said, I felt ready to hear them, ready to meet them on purpose, just as he believed I would. Thursday crept closer with a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. Every day my son seemed both lighter and heavier, lighter because the secret was no longer his alone, heavier because sharing it meant he now had to face what came next. I noticed it in the little things. The way he lingered at the table after breakfast, how he checked the garage for his father's tape measure twice in one evening, how his eyes flickered toward me as if making sure I was still standing steady. By Wednesday night, the plaque card had become almost sacred. I kept it in the drawer where I once stored my husband's letters, and more than once I caught myself opening it just to trace the words again. He fixed what he could, and stood with what he couldn't. It wasn't just an inscription anymore. It was a charge passed down, a standard for the way we could live. On the day itself, the weather surprised me. The forecast had threatened rain, but instead the sky opened into a clear, sharp blue. The air carried that particular crispness that only early spring can bring, where each breath feels like rinsed glass. My son met me in the hallway, holding the old tape measure. The yellow paint was chipped, the metal clip bent, but it still carried the smell of iron and sawdust. "You ready?" he asked, though his own hand trembled just enough that I noticed. "As ready as I'll ever be," I answered, slipping my arm through his. When we arrived at the community center, Caleb was already waiting near the maple tree, shoulders squared, but eyes soft. A small group had gathered, familiar faces from town, a few people I didn't know. They greeted us with quiet nods, as if we were all carrying something breakable between us. The bench looked the same as always, except now the new plaque gleamed against the worn wood, sunlight catching on its edges. The director of the center spoke first, her voice steady, words simple. She told a story about my husband fixing the old book cart, how he had refused payment and instead left a note. Some things are worth standing beside, even if you can't fix them. That line, she said, had lived in her office for years. Now it was etched in metal for anyone to read. My son stepped forward then, holding the tape measure. For a moment he just looked at it, thumb tracing the crack in the case. "This belonged to my dad," he said, his voice carrying farther than I expected. "It never rolls back straight, no matter how careful you are." He used to laugh about it. Said it reminded him that life doesn't fit neatly either. He paused, swallowed, and looked toward me. I guess I carry it for the same reason now. Because grief doesn't roll back straight, but it does return. And when it does, I want to be the kind of man who faces it instead of hiding from it. Silence followed, the kind that holds more than applause ever could. I felt my chest tighten with pride and sorrow all braided together. Caleb clapped him gently on the shoulder, and others nodded, eyes wet, heads bowed. When my turn came, I didn't have a speech prepared. I just placed my hand on the plaque and let the words come. He was a man who fixed doors, toys, even hearts when he could. And when he couldn't, he didn't walk away. He stayed. That's the part I hope we all remember, not just that he built things, but that he stood beside people. The breeze stirred the branches overhead, scattering young leaves that drifted down like blessings. For a moment, I swore I could hear his laugh in that sound. Afterward, the group lingered, sharing small stories, letting the plaque anchor us in shared memory. My son stood close, tape measure in hand, Caleb beside him. I realized then that this moment wasn't only about honoring the past. It was about seeing the future being shaped right in front of me. These young men weren't just remembering my husband. They were carrying him forward in their choices, in the way they wanted to live. On the walk back to the car, my son slipped his hand into mine, the way he used to as a boy crossing a busy street. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. I squeezed his hand. "Thank you for letting me." But I could feel it. There was more inside him, something he hadn't yet shared. The plaque, the ceremony, even Caleb's honesty had been only part of it. The way he avoided my eyes told me another truth was waiting, one that might change the way I saw not just my husband's legacy, but my son's path. And I knew, as surely as I had known the sound of my husband's voice in the garage years ago, that it would come soon, maybe that night, maybe tomorrow, but it would come. That night, the house was quieter than usual. My son sat across from me at the kitchen table, the old tape measure resting between us like a third presence. He spun it once, stopped, then looked up with a steadiness I hadn't seen before. "Mom, there's one more thing," he said. "I didn't just join the group for me. I'm helping lead it now. Caleb and I." We started talking to some of the younger kids who lost parents. They needed someone closer to their age. I didn't want to tell you until I knew I could handle it. I felt my throat tighten, but not with fear, this time with pride. "So you're carrying forward what your dad stood for," I said softly. He nodded, eyes shining. "Yeah, fix what I can, stand with what I can't, just like him." For a long while, we didn't need words. The rain outside had stopped. The house felt settled, and in that stillness I realized something. The story of loss hadn't ended with my husband. It had become the story of how my son learned to live with open hands, and how I learned to trust the man he was becoming. And in that moment I knew we were no longer just remembering. We were continuing.